Good afternoon. My name is Tiffany, and I'll be your conference operator today. At this time, I'd like to welcome everyone to the groundbreaking university study reveals taxpayer impact of project labor agreements in California school construction conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you'd like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you'd like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. Eric Bervold, President of National University Systems Institute for Policy Research, you may begin your conference.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us here today. I'll do some brief introductions and tell you who's on the call, and then we'll go over just a little bit about the structure of today's web conference on the release of our study. Joining us on the call and available for questions are myself. I'm the president of National University System Institute for Policy Research and one of the authors of this study. Dr. Dale Glazer, who's with Glazer Consulting, who provided much of the statistical analysis for the research, and then Vince Vasquez with the Institute, who did much of the data gathering and structuring of the research question. We also have available for the media Leisha Schweitzer with the University of Southern California and their Kesden Institute for Public Finance and Infrastructure Policy. As we'll note as the call goes on, USC provided a wonderful third-party review of our methods and statistical approach and provides a letter talking about their review of what we did in the report in Appendix A. And then should you have technical questions about contracting that you wish to get a perspective on and localize that, we had Matt Heavey, who's with Pacific Coast Reconstruction, who's done school projects in the Mount Diablo and San Jose Unified District. Again, Matt wasn't part of our study, but we did think that for the media's purpose, it might be useful to have a contractor on the line if there are questions that get into those that we don't know. The ground rules is, again, we'll take questions at the end, and you can queue up for questions. That just will keep it orderly here on the web conference. And should you have technical issues, you should all have the phone number and information on the website in terms of what to do there. Just to give you a little bit of brief background, the National University System Institute for Policy Research is a research unit which is affiliated with NUS in January of 2009. We focus on economic and public policy issues, largely focused on San Diego and the broader Southern California area. We do work such as what we're going to talk about today, but we also do economic forecasting, economic impact analyses. We did a study on looking at investment in wildfire protection throughout the Southland. And so we do a number of questions involving economic competitiveness in Southern California as well as policy challenges. As you may know, project labor agreements have been controversial in the geographic area that we spend most of our time focusing on, particularly here in San Diego County, where NUS has its flagship locations, ranging from both project disagreements over school construction as well as in broader infrastructure policies. When NUSI looked at the literature that's out there, and we'll talk more about that as the call goes on project labor agreements, we believe that there were unique opportunities that were in California to expand the state of research beyond where it had been pushed forward by some of the researchers that were working on this. And then again, we think it's always important that commentators, both those presenting research as well as those criticizing it, just disclose funding issues. And we did want to let you know that when we set up the research project, one of the things that it entailed was the procurement of a database from Dodge, McGraw-Hill, as well as hiring interns to pester school districts for information. And ABC, California Cooperation Committee, generously provided about 20% of the project's funding. The remaining 80% came from the general funds of the National University System to support the staff time and research efforts that were entailed. I now want to turn it over to Vince, and Vince is going to walk through, just give a brief review. I think everybody on this call knows quite a bit about PLAs, but he'll just give a quick snapshot for those that are working up their stories. We'll talk about the structure of our research and then talk about the findings that we uncovered. Vince?
Thank you, Eric. And again, my name is Vince Vasquez. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst at the National University System Institute for Policy Research. As Eric said, I'll be providing some background on PLAs as well as the structure of our research as well as the findings from our statistical analysis. Our project labor agreements, as we know, are contracts signed between construction trade unions and project owners to establish working site conditions and management rights prior to the start of construction. On the federal level, the use of PLAs date back to at least the late 1930s. For the purposes of our project, we're examining project labor agreements signed between school districts in the state of California as well as trade unions. Now, while each PLA may be unique, all contain three major components. The first involves how labor disputes will be handled. Both parties consent to a process where disputes are resolved without labor disruptions. Contractors who are parties to PLAs agree not to lock out workers from work sites. In turn, construction trade unions agreed not to strike. PLAs also establish the hiring process for construction work. Most require contractors to use a centralized union job referral system or a hiring hall as a source of workers. And lastly, employment conditions such as wages, benefits, work hours, and worksite rules are typically detailed within a PLA. The debate over the efficiency and effectiveness of these agreements is nothing short of intense. Supporters say that PLAs ensure timely construction, keeping projects on time and on budget, and thereby increasing worker productivity. Critics argue, however, that project labor agreements limit competition, raise costs, and reduce much of the competition and are quite burdensome. Within our project, we wanted to take a look at, well, what is happening in the state of California in terms of project labor agreements? Is there enough data? Has there previous research? From what we found, in fact, there had not been a previous analysis done in the state of California. For those research projects that had been done in other states, they had insufficient sample sizes, which makes it difficult to isolate the impact of PLAs from other factors that impact costs. We did find that there were at least 24 California K-12 school districts that have adopted PLAs. Within the state of California, we have a couple of unique factors that make analysis very highly potential. We found that California already requires prevailing wages for construction trade workers on school construction projects. This allows for minimum variance as you have a floor for wages for all these projects. There's also prescriptive state education building code rules which create greater uniformity, reduce regulatory variance between districts. California also has a public records law which allows for the public to obtain government documents, and in this case, we were looking for architectural drawings, information about school projects, as well as financial information, which is also provided online through the California State Department of the State Architect, which facilitated our data collection. Now, within our project, we first gathered school construction information from McGraw-Hill Construction Dodge, which provided a preliminary look at new school construction in California. We initially had found about 11,000 projects that were done over the last 2 decades. We wanted to reduce the number to a workable set of cases for statistical analysis, so we set parameters that were similar to those set by previous researchers on this topic. From 40,000 to 400,000 square feet. We looked at projects that had a valuation of $5 million or more, and we isolated our research to only new structures rather than interior renovations or redesign projects. From months of data collection, pester phone calls, as well as a mass mailing in May of 2010, we actually received back completed financial and descriptive information for 551 school projects in 180 school districts. Of these, 65 were project labor agreement tied projects from 8 different districts and 486 non-PLA projects. Our ultimate data set is 4 times larger than any published study in this field of work. From our statistical analysis, we found that the average cost per square foot for all projects was $228.56. This is a figure that has been adjusted for inflation. For project labor agreements, the cost was significantly higher at $302.98 per square foot. Non-PLA projects weighing in at $218.61 per square foot. Now, within our statistical analysis, which we wanted to control for other factors that previous research had found impact costs for school construction projects, things as the inclusion of a gymnasium, swimming pools, the date of construction, the stories within a project. And if we could control for these factors in statistical tests, we can isolate the impact that project labor agreements have. And we did actually, in fact, find that PLAs increased costs from 13 to 15%. This is $20.90 to $32 to 49 cents per square foot. When we look at the 65 schools that were built under a PLA, the cumulative cost was $1.7 billion. If you take that 13 to 15% additional cost associated with PLAs, that's $219 to $253 million in additional costs for the use of the project labor agreements. And the figures that we found are actually consistent with previous research, which shows that PLAs increased school construction costs from 9 to 20%. The project labor agreements that we examined to be associated with higher construction costs across 4 different statistical tests that we had conducted, and these tests were those, again, that had been used in previous research. And project labor agreements were not the only thing to be found to increase costs. The inclusion of a gym, a swimming pool, the square footage of a project, as well as the average date of school construction were also found to impact costs.
Great. Vince, thank you very much for that review of the structure of the research and the findings that we have. One thing that's clear, both before and in the most recent days since we put out some information about our study, is that this is a topic of some passion and concern in the vigorous debate that follows it. One thing that our project sponsor asked for, and we were excited to have occur, was a third-party review of our statistical tests, our methods that we used, and then the kinds of conclusions that we drew from the research findings that we derived. And conducting that third-party review was the Keston Institute for Public Financing and Infrastructure Policy at the University of Southern California. That's part of their School of Policy Planning and Development. And joining us on the call today is Associate Professor Lisa Schweitzer from USC. And Lisa will talk about what they were asked to do, what they found, and then again, some of those findings are described and summarized in Appendix A of the report in a letter on USC letterhead. Lisa, if you could go ahead.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I will talk about the 4 things that I look at when I review studies of this type. The first thing that I do is I'm given the data sample that the authors had to work with, and I was asked to see if, based on the same method that they describe, whether I could replicate their numbers in the tables that they report throughout their analysis. And I found that I could do that using just their data sample. I don't have access to the entire sample or the entire population of data. I also check to read through the analysis to evaluate whether or not the authors are using standard statistical methods and practices. And a really important part of the review is to see whether or not the authors are disclosing the technical judgments that they are making in constructing the model, so that outside reviewers and the audience of the reports can read what kind of judgment calls the authors have made in constructing the analysis that they did. I also examined the sampling method and asked some questions about that and tried to ensure that the authors disclosed how they constructed their sample so that readers can evaluate what that sample means for the analysis. And then finally, I evaluate the research design and the extent to which authors have made it clear that their research design lets them make conclusions about correlations and associations rather than causality. So throughout the report, the authors note that this is a study of association and not causation. And I wrote a memo and gave the authors some feedback on how to present some more of their data. I offered them some suggestions on how to handle some of the issues that arose during the statistical analysis. And they're going to talk about some of those issues, so I'm not going to, so that I don't steal their thunder. And that's what Keston's role was in reviewing the analysis.
Thank you, Lisa, for that. And again, questions at the end if you have them for Dr. Schweitzer. So again, as I noted, this subject often generates intense feelings on both sides, and we've seen that this week. And I wanted to talk about two things that have recently come across our desks, and I'm sure yours, and may be important as you try and put together a story on this subject for your readers and your listeners. First, and I think the most easily dealt with, we received a press release from the AFL-CIO and the San Diego Building Trades Organization today. I have to say I'm kind of disappointed. I don't think it shows a solid understanding either of what we did or the basic nature of statistical research. They criticize us for not including variables, and this was never a paper designed to try and be a predictive model at 100% accuracy for school construction. It was designed to try and isolate and see what statistical relationship there might be between PLAs and school construction costs, and that's an important distinction. Moreover, the things that they suggest to do aren't easily, and I don't think possible, to data source over the course of time that we were looking at and construct, even build into a full model. I hate to say it, but it sounds like a lot of spaghetti was thrown on the wall, and they're hoping some stick. Now, one thing which was included and where we do think that there's something important, we actually talk about it in our report, and I'm going to try and make it as accessible as possible, is the criticisms offered up by Dr. Bellman, and particularly his discussions about something that's called an omitted variable bias. So part of the nature of the data set that we were working with is that most of the project labor agreements that we have are in LAUSD. Los Angeles Unified School District has used PLAs for much longer than other districts in the state, has built more schools overall than any other district in the state, and we found out of 47 LAUSD projects, 46 were built under PLAs. One, a sort of special charter school associated with a medical orthotics program, was not. That's our best information. So one of the things that this does is that there is a lot of what statisticians would call covariance between the presence of PLAs and the existence in Los Angeles Unified. And we tease out at the end of the results some of the challenges and issues that arise because of that covariance. What Dr. Bellman's really offering up is he's offering up alternative explanations for what our findings are, that it's not the presence of PLAs that are associated with the higher costs, but there's something else going on in Los Angeles Unified School District. Now, early on, we looked at the suggestions that Dr. Bellman offered up in his letter. We did not find any indication that LA Unified School District builds to some sort of higher seismic standard than other California schools, nor a data source that would allow us to uniformly code that across the data. All schools in California are required to submit and get approval from the Department of State architect, and that seemed to be a good way of controlling for any sort of variance in building standards. We also, Dr. Bellman suggests the prevailing wage in Los Angeles County are uniformly higher than the rest of the state. We did not find any measures that study on a county-by-county basis all the trades and try and come up with an index. But even more importantly, when we looked at some of the master bargaining agreements that pertain to Los Angeles County, the greater Southern California area, and compared them to Northern California, we noted numerous trades where the wages are actually higher in Northern California, not higher in Los Angeles, countering Dr. Bellman's proposed hypotheses. We took great pains to capture many non-PLA urban projects in our data set. Indeed, I think that's a really refinement over the other studies that have been done in New York and Massachusetts. We went throughout the state to make sure that we were capturing projects built in those kinds of challenging environments in urban areas so that we could look at whether demolition or multi-story construction has an impact that would sort of cloud the analysis for the importance of PLAs. And so overall, we found no plausible explanation for why we found in our data set these higher costs other than PLAs. But it is important to note, and we do in the report, and we feel that that actually is the strength of this report. We're not trying to hide anything. That we cannot, in the end of the day, reject an alternative hypothesis that there's some unknown factor in LAUSD that no one's identified that might be the explanation for what we're finding as opposed to PLAs. But a good tool in social science is look for parsimonious or relatively simple explanations, and rather than try and look for an X factor or some unknown thing, we think that the key variable when we looked at the 551 schools was the presence of a PLA. So that wraps up, and we'll start for questions here in a minute. As we again, just to remind you, we found that PLAs are associated with these higher school construction costs using 4 different statistical models to try and attempt to isolate the importance of whether outliers or the structure of the data set. It's the largest and most comprehensive to date in the field of research. Another thing that I would add is we did great pains to provide a research method which can be replicated by third-party researchers. Other researchers went out and did direct interviews with contractors and architects and don't provide the source data to it. We provided a Public Records Act request that could be submitted by third-party researchers in a similar format and provided them information to the Department of State architect for the data set that we looked to confirm those findings. And it's important for California. Over $64 billion in school construction bonds have been passed in the last decade in over 21,000 schools. We've got 24 districts that have adopted PLAs as a tool for their construction management. Many others are considering using them, and they're the source of great debate. And we hope this study that looks at costs will offer some opportunities for continued dialogue. Finally, just in case you have, we'll take questions and answers here, so cue them up as you will, as the moderator gave you directions, and we'll remind them. But we're also available for follow-up interviews, and you have our contact information there on the screen. Either myself or Vince Vasquez are available for interviews, and we can arrange interviews with Lisa and Dale should you need to do additional follow-up with them. So with that, I'll open it up, and we'll take questions from any of the media on the phone.
At this time, I would like to remind everyone, in order to ask a question, please press star followed by the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Again, if you have a question, that's star 1 on your telephone keypad. Your first question comes from the line of Carlos Rico with San Diego Daily Trans. Your line is open.
Hi, Carlos.
Hi, good morning. What was the motivation behind this study? Why was it done at this time?
So for the benefit of callers on the line, San Diego Unified passed a follow-up bond measure in 2008, November 2008, to quite a remarkable bond measure, Prop MM, that had been passed some years before. And one of the things that emerged as the district, which underwent a change in board leadership, quickly in the process of sort of after that election and the passage of the bond, adopted with quite a bit of controversy a project labor agreement. So, and then it has also become an issue throughout our region, both looking at the debate and controversy over a project proposed in Chula Vista for Gaylord, as well as issues in respect to some county initiative and some issues in regards to becoming charter rather than general law cities in our county. So this has been a topic of intense debate and something that we were interested in thinking about. But I want to really go back to it. We thought that the biggest opportunity to make a contribution in this study were a couple of unique aspects about California, and as we thought about how that fit into the existing literature that's out there. One, we had an opportunity to just look at a ton more schools. California has been engaged, as we said at the end of the call, in a building boom, and there were numerous districts and numerous projects that were out there. And then secondly, two conditions in California allow us to get good data. We have a robust Public Records Act law that compels districts to provide information. Now, not everyone did, and we didn't have the resources to threaten them with lawsuits, but the law is that they need to provide this information, and we found that to be a much more useful tool than trying to rely purely on voluntary cooperation, such as the other studies did. And then secondly, we have the Department of State Architect, which is responsible, and school districts are responsible for providing up information about costs and dates of construction on school projects. So we had a way to verify. We didn't use the DSA, and in almost, only in a very few cases do we use the DSA as our original source for data, but we use it as a confirming set of data, and most importantly, by looking at what the school districts told us and what they had told the DSA, we could flag districts that required additional follow-up and investigation, and in some cases when there was just too much variance between those findings, we took that sample, that observation out of our data set because we just couldn't confirm how the data had been structured. So, Carlos, that's the reason why. It was controversial, and California provides a great field because of those conditions to examine this question.
Eric? Eric?
Yes. Yes?
Yes, I just wanted to also add that I'm a small contractor in Contra Costa County, and over the past 14 months, 3 school districts have gone to PLAs, and that's $600 million worth of bond work that has kind of been taken out of my realm. And that's on top of 4 other school districts over the past 7 years. So it's really, it's impacted my company dramatically because I choose, and my employees choose not to be union members. So it definitely has an impact on the local contractors.
Any other questions?
Again, as a reminder, if you have a question at this time, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Again, that's star 1 on your telephone keypad. We have a follow-up question from the line of Carlos Rico with San Diego Daily Transcript. Your line is open.
Yes. Were there any correlations with the findings as far as scheduling of time and as far as hiring? Because typically project labor agreements, union work.
Yeah, Carlos, I think I understand your question, which is is the question, did we investigate the extent to which these projects are being done by union and non-union labor?
Correct.
Yeah, no, we did not. On another project that we put an RFP into, we understand that information requires some really detailed project-by-project auditing of employment records at a school site level, and that really wasn't the level of analysis in this project. We wanted to look not at a case-by-case basis, but the findings that can be derived by looking at 551 schools in a statistical way.
What about as far as scheduling goes? Typically, when a project takes longer to complete, it's going to cost more.
Did not look. That's a really good question, and a place where there may be some really interesting ways to do follow-up research. One thing we'd have to confirm is whether schools have a uniform way of identifying the beginning and end date, so we could try and figure out a way to make sure that we were measuring apples to apples. But it's an interesting question, and one where there could be very interesting future research to see if you put together an idea of sort of $1 per day or some sort of measure for the time, whether or not these projects are or not being done faster.
Your next question comes from the line of Anna Marie Odie with Building Trades News. Your line is open.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the presentation. My question to the project's authors is, given that you found the larger cost for the PLA project, yet there is prevailing wage on these projects, did you do any research or do you have any theories as to what would cause the higher cost?
Yeah, and I want to be really, this is important because, as Lisa said, this is a project of association and not causation. We did not investigate causal factors, and so I don't want to be misconstrued that we're trying to proffer up causal mechanisms from the data. What I will say is that the project labor agreements provide a useful empirical way of exploring two questions in economics. There is a field of economics that thinks that market structure and the number of competitors and bidders, the buyers and sellers of products, matter most in setting price. And that to understand the price of a particular good, you look at market structure. And fewer competitors means prices will be higher as oligopolies exert influence in a skewed market structure. A second school of economic thought is that those things are, those market structures are important, but they're outweighed by elements that are unique to the structure of individual businesses, and that the fact that project labor agreements create greater productivity and more certainty, less disruption, means that any additional costs that are paid from union hiring hall requirements or paying into the benefit programs for unions for non-union employees that may also have benefits, so sort of a double dip, if you will, onto that, that any of those extra costs are washed away by the higher productivity. The useful way of examining the question the way we did is it's an empirical test of those two propositions. And not only our research, but the other research suggests that these productivity gains that are purported to be true aren't showing up in lowering costs. And there's evidence both from our studies and from studies out of Suffolk University that it seems to be market structure and the limitation on competitiveness that is moving forward. But again, our study was one of association, not causation. So I want to say, make sure people understand those are working hypotheses and what the data and results suggest in terms of the models for economics, but that would require additional, much more detailed sort of path-dependent analysis to try and make sure to isolate that impact.
There are no further questions at this time. I turn the conference back over to our presenters.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for participating and calling in. We're really excited about this project. And we're mostly excited, not because it's done, but because we think we really made a great opportunity to contribute to this debate. It's one that's vigorous, and there's views on both sides. I think many of you that are on this call from the media will receive press releases and so forth, and I'm sure that you'll be contacting those folks as you put together your stories. But we really believe that by looking at 551 separate schools and school projects in California over this period of time, a mix of urban, suburban, and rural, that we've got some good findings that are suggestive of the relationship between PLAs and higher per square foot costs of construction. So thank you very much, and thanks for joining us.
This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.